Yeah, no, it was absolutely horrific. And of course, it really has overshadowed and I think kind of thrown a wet blanket over Joe Biden's trip to Israel. And so I think to a large extent, it's just going to be kind of figuring out what happened, offering his support and wishes for all of the victims of that horrible tragedy. But it's certainly not the foot that Joe Biden wanted to get off on with this trip for
And
sure.
yeah, and particularly in trying to negotiate with the Arab countries that they've really tried to improve relations with.
It's going to make it much more difficult, of course. And I think to a large extent, it's just going to lead to sort of a stalemate. I'm not sure to what extent negotiations are really even unfolding in the moment as everyone just tries to figure out what happened.
Yeah. Let's go to Jim Jordan. He missed out on the first round. Of course, that's not necessarily an obstacle, but does he have any chance of moving some very entrenched opponents?
Well, I think he's going to have to get 20 or so Republicans over to his side if he's going to earn the speaker's gavel. I do think that some of these holdouts are maybe eventually just going to have to say, I'm not sure what other option there is besides Jim Jordan. Just looking up and down the Republican field, there's no one obvious who could kind of take his place. And so they may just kind of be using this as a protest vote initially, and then they'll eventually coalesce behind Jim Jordan. But it is certainly a mess. I mean, it's really revealing the level of dysfunction in Congress that has been going on some time, but is particularly acute at the moment.
Yeah. Does backing from Donald Trump help Jim Jordan or not?
I think by and large it does. Of course, most of the holdouts are really moderates who haven't been big fans of Donald Trump, and so for those individuals, I don't think it's a huge bonus. But the Republican Party in the United States has just become so thoroughly Trumpified. Whatever Donald Trump wants, Donald Trump gets, and so certainly, I think having his blessing is something that is a net positive for Jim Jordan.
Yeah, particularly for that disruptive group that sort of brought Kevin McCarthy's speakership to an end. Of course, what we are seeing with this total chaos is, the inability to function, and particularly when you've got this Middle East crisis now unfolding on top of the support that the US wants to give to Ukraine.
Absolutely. I mean, President Biden is requesting a pretty wide-ranging supplemental funding bill of $100 billion that would include funding for both Israel as well as Ukraine. But this is the real risk whenever you have dysfunction like this in Congress, is that it just paralyzes everything. That's one thing if there aren't any big situations going on. It's just divided government at home and it's kind of politics as usual. But then, you have a real crisis like this where the American government needs to be responsive, and it can't be responsive precisely because it's kind of been thrown into this chaos. And I think both Republicans as well as Democrats have their share of blame in this whole fiasco.
Yeah, it is quite astounding to watch from afar. Tell me, the courts are struggling to get Trump to stick to his gag orders in the multitude of cases that he is facing. What are the difficulties of navigating this, given he is still a political candidate as well as someone who's facing multiple indictments?
Absolutely. I mean, Donald Trump is kind of waging his battle as much in the court of public opinion as he is in the courtroom. And I think to a large extent, he thinks that his best hope is to become president, which would grant him to some degree immunity from prosecution by the Department of Justice. And so that's really, I think, his priority. So sort of given the option between winning in the courtroom or sort of winning in the court of public opinion, I think he would rather choose the latter just because it gives him more flexibility. But yeah, absolutely is a huge challenge to be waging kind of these two fights at once.
Yeah. Do you think the courts could enforce some of the gag orders that have been placed on him?
Well, that's the real big question, right? Because these gag orders have been imposed on Donald Trump. He for the most part, has not adhered to them. It does become, though, very tricky because he, of course, has these First Amendment constitutionally guaranteed rights to free speech, and he'll basically just say, I'm in the midst of an election, and I can attack whoever I want. But whenever it comes to sort of intimidating witnesses or criticizing judges or sort of railing against prosecutors, that's where it gets into much more murky territory, and ultimately it will depend on sort of how far the judge is willing to go in putting a clamp down on this kind of language.
Yeah. Good to talk again, Thomas. Appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks.